So in this video we are going to study about the phloem transport. Phloem transport means we know that in the phloem the food is translocated, right? This phloem transport, it is a long distance transport. Translocation of the substances occurs from the source to sink. Source to sink. Here if you see phloem transport, what is the source? Leaves, right? From the leaves the food materials was synthesized. From the leaves to the different parts of the plant the food gets supplied. That is, the source is the leaf and different parts which need the food are called as sink. So depending on season, the need of the plant and source of the sink may be reversed. For example, this is the plant, right? In one season the leaves prepare the food material and translocate the food material to the different parts, and along with that it will translocate the food material to the roots also. In that season the roots store the excess food material. In the next season, during the early spring season, there is no food here. Here the birds were developing. They need energy in the form of sugars, but here there is no food. In the next season, these tubers, the roots in the form of tubers, will act as a source of food, because where is the food? Here in the roots there is a food, but here there is no food. Then what will happen? From this region, roots region, they will act as a source. The food is translocated to the growing regions, that is birds. That means in one season they will act as a source and another one will act as a sink. In the next season the sink will act as a source and the source will act as a sink. That means here the source and sink relationship is variable. The direction of the flow of the organic substances is also, it may be a downward direction or upward direction. That means bidirectional or multidirectional. If you see in the xylem, the translocation of the water, it is a one way. It will occurs only in one direction, that is unidirectional. And whereas the translocation of the food, it may be any direction. It may be a bidirection, multidirectional, it may be any direction. And if we observe the phloem sap, what are the contents present in it is, it contains water, non-reducing sugars like sucrose, and other sugars, hormones and amino acids. All these components are present in the phloem sap. And the next one we will see about pressure flow hypothesis or mass flow hypothesis or Munch hypothesis. Here this pressure flow hypothesis or mass flow hypothesis, it is it will explains about the translocation of the sugars from the source to sink. This experiment, this hypothesis is done for explaining about the translocation of the sugars from the source to sink, and this was proposed by Munch. Hence this hypothesis is also called as Munch hypothesis. This hypothesis was proposed by Munch and it is elaborated by the graphs. According to Munch, the organic substances in the form of sucrose, they flow in the form of a solution from sieve tube elements, that is in the phloem. They consist of sieve tube elements, right? Living sieve tube elements. Within the sieve tube elements, the sucrose will travel in the form of a solution, and here from the source to sink they travel of osmotically generated pressure gradient. Depending upon this pressure gradient, from the source to sink the solution will travel, the phloem sap will travel. And if we see the Munch hypothesis, we know that the leaves consist of the mesophyll cells. In the mesophyll cells, the carbohydrates were synthesized by the process of photosynthesis. And here the carbohydrates were in the form of glucose. And this glucose is converted into the sucrose, disaccharide. The monosaccharide glucose is converted into the disaccharide sucrose. And then it is translocated. So before translocating, the glucose is converted into sucrose. And here, this is a mesophyll cell, where it consists of glucose. This glucose is converted into the sucrose within this, and then sucrose is translocated to the companion cells. The sucrose is given to the companion cells, and from these companion cells the sucrose is loaded into the sieve tube elements, living sieve tube elements. This is the sieve tube elements, this is the xylem, this is the sieve tube elements. The phloem consists of sieve tube elements, right? From the companion cells the sucrose will enter into the sieve tube elements, and because of this loading process it requires energy, hence it is active process. Loading is the active process. Loading of sucrose within the sieve tube elements, concentration of the solute increases. That means the solution will become hypertonic. So because of this, sieve tubes, they absorb water from the xylem. So they absorb water from the xylem by the process of osmosis. We know on the osmosis what will happen? The water moves from the hypotonic condition to the hypertonic condition. Here within the sieve tube elements, what is the condition? Hypertonic, right? Hence the water will move from the hypotonic to hypertonic condition. And then because of this, osmotic pressure inside the sieve tube increases. What will happen here? Osmotic pressure increases. As per the osmotic pressure, what will happen? The phloem sap moves towards the region of higher osmotic pressure to the lower osmotic pressure. Where the osmotic pressure is low, to in that direction the sap movement occurs. Here where is the osmotic pressure condition is seen? In the sink region, osmotic pressure is low. Hence from the higher osmotic pressure to lower osmotic pressure, the phloem sap travels, and if it reaches to the sink region, so if it reaches to the sink region, sucrose, it need to be unloaded. From the sieve tube elements to sink, it has to unload the sucrose. For the unloading of the sucrose also need energy. Hence it is also active transport. Loading is also active transport, and unloading of the sucrose is also active transport. And here the cells of this sink, the cells of the sink use the sucrose for converting the sucrose into energy. It may be used for the making the cellulosic cell walls, and also it may store that sucrose in the form of starch, also in the form of reserve food material, right? So it may use that sucrose in any form. When sucrose was discharged into the sink, the osmotic pressure in the sieve tube elements decreases. What will happen? Because of the unloading of the sucrose, the osmotic pressure here decreases. And then the water present here, right? The water moves out of the phloem. Again, the water will be returned to the xylem. As the osmotic pressure decreases, the water in the sieve tube elements was given to the adjacent xylem. And the loss of the sugars in the phloem sap, that causes a high water potential. As a result, water moves out of the phloem cells and returning to the xylem. So this is what happens in the transport. What will happen? Glucose is converted into the sucrose. Sucrose will enter into the companion cells. These companion cells will load this sucrose into the living sieve tube cells, and loading of this sucrose also an active transport. And sieve tube elements, because of the accumulation of the sucrose, that causes hypertonic condition, and water will enter into the sieve tube elements by the process of osmosis from the adjacent xylem. And then because of this, high osmotic pressure is generated, and it travels towards the low osmotic pressure. And where the low osmotic pressure is present, near the sink region, the osmotic pressure is low, and hence the sucrose will be given to the sink. And here the sucrose will be given, right? That unloading process is also active transport, that was also needed energy, hence it is also active transport. And because of loss of sucrose from the phloem, that causes high water potential in the phloem. As a result, water will be moves to the xylem, that is water will be returned to the xylem. And so this is about Munch hypothesis. The next one is demonstration of translocation of the food in phloem by Girdling experiment. So this experiment is conducted to demonstrate the pathway of translocation of the organic nutrients in the plants. That is to identify the tissue which translocates the organic nutrients. And this experiment was conducted by Malfigi. Who conducted this? This experiment was conducted by Malfigi. So for this experiment, we will take a tree, and on that tree a ring of bark up to the depth of the phloem was removed. Up to the depth of phloem, the bark of that plant, bark of that trunk was removed. So after removing the bark, the plant will looks like this. After ring, what we have removed, we have removed a bark of ring, right? The ring of bark consists of phloem, cortex and cork. So phloem, cortex and cork was removed. And after few weeks, we have to observe that tree. The bark above the ring, this is the ring, right? The bark above the ring will swells. So why this was swelling? Because from the above side, that is from the leaves, the food was translocated up to the roots, right? So the phloem was transporting the nutrients, but there is no phloem. Excess nutrients was accumulating here. That is why above the ring was swelling, and here the growth below the ring was stunted or reduced. Here the growth of the plant was reducing, and the swelling of the bark above the ring was because of the accumulation of the excess accumulation of the nutrients. And this experiment finally proves what? The phloem is necessary for the translocation of the food material, and the phloem is the tissue which is responsible for translocation of the food. With this, we have completed the transportation in plants. In the next video, we are going to start with the mineral nutrition.